Hello, everybody. Welcome to the newest episode of Policy Word, depending on when you're listening. This time, we're going to talk about a topic that's pretty close to our hearts and our souls. It's student debt. It's something that affects almost everybody from 18 to 24 years old in the great United States of America. And Biden saying he will not do much to absolve student debt. Biden has recently said in the CNN town hall that he will not cancel up to $50,000 in student loan debt for every student borrower. He will consider canceling up to $10,000, but that's only if Congress signs it through law, of course. For people who want to know a little bit about the history of student loan debt, I can give that, but first I'll let my two co-hosts introduce themselves.
Matthew. I am bit central. I'm to the right of Russ and to the left of the other co-host here, John. And I got a little bit of a libertarian slant.
And I am the aforementioned John, and I offer the conservative perspective on this podcast.
Yes, and we will see the perspectives come out in fiery passion, because this is something we all care about. I'll just give a short overview of the history of student loans and how they got to this point that they are today. Really, grants and government payment for student loans started in 1965 with LBJ's Higher Education Act and his Great Society program, which basically started the use of grants for students based on their income levels, which really helped to decrease income inequality and give a way for those impoverished people or just low income people to increase their socioeconomic status. This changed in 1981 when Reagan passed a tax and expenditure limitations for all states, and this caused states to spend less money on education. And you might ask, what's the reaction to this? This means colleges whose most of funding came from state funding now had to increase their tuition to offset the balance. So this led to a high increase of tuition, with students being able to pay less of it, which means they take more and more in private student loans. Next, we have George Bush, the second one, the worst one, the one he basically made it almost near impossible for people to declare student loan bankruptcy unless you're literally just in exorbitant amounts of debt. You cannot claim student loan bankruptcy, which just exacerbates the problem, makes it harder for people to pay those recurring interest payments. And after that, we have the 2008 economic crisis. During this time, student loans were about $560 billion. But the problem is the government bailed out Wall Street and bailed out the corporations and still decided to do nothing about student loans. Now we fast forward, student loans are currently $1.7 trillion in America. They make up about 8% of the United States GDP. That is correct. 8% of our GDP is in student loans. Wow, what a stable economy. And I do want to say, this is not like a rapid escalation. It's been occurring over time for the past 60, 70 years. It's just now that people and politicians are realizing that we need to take steps to solve the problem. Biden does not seem like he's willing to cancel all student loans, and there are many other solutions we will talk about here today. But I first want to see what my co-host's view on this is. Should student loans be canceled by the government, and if so, how much and why?
Well, I'm probably going to have the most hardline approach to this, and I am going to flat out say no, there should not be loan forgiveness whatsoever. The reason why I say so is because it is not feasible as a stimulus for the economy, especially during the pandemic. Now, of course, I am not against pausing loan repayments. I am not against refinancing, perhaps, but no blanket action to remove 50,000 or 10,000. Most of my key points will come from a piece from Mark Kantrowitz, who is on the editorial board of the Journal of Student Financial Aid, also a member of the Board of Trustees for the Center for Excellence in Education, and has obtained a bachelor's in math and a bachelor's in philosophy from MIT and a master's of computer science from Carnegie Mellon University. First point, of course, is that it's not even legal for the president to go about it through executive action. I'm pretty sure, as you said before, he'd have to pass it through Congress. Congress has the power of the purse strings. And even then, the legislation that's quoted most of the time is taken out of context and usually applies to Perkin loans or federal family education loans and is limited in scope. If Joe Biden decides to pass it through Congress, that is one thing, but he cannot do it by executive order, and I applaud him for not doing so, because think of the can of worms that will open up. If he does something like that by extending executive power, that leaves it for the next president to do something similar, and we're caught in a weird slippery slope. And I will admit, if you want to call it a fallacy, go ahead. Second thing, student loan payments themselves only make up about 0.4% of the GDP. So the payments make up 0.4%. So with the payments, you aren't really freeing up much of the economy. If you give people that, say that you were to forgive them, okay, so the payments is 0.4%. You're not really looking at a spur right there. There are other things you can do to possibly help people because you're only helping those who own college degrees. Even then, if you were to take off $50,000 in loan forgiveness, over 40% of people would still owe student loan debt. So it doesn't really make a huge impact in the long run. They're still having to pay it off. You're just removing long term, but this seems like an action in the short term. So you're not helping them in the short term financially. Another thing I would like to point out that he explicitly mentions is the average loan repayment per month is, the average loan payment is $306. And that's small compared to the average car payment of $392 or the average mortgage of $1,254. Now, granted, student loans do off-put people from buying houses, but it's found that later on, people purchase houses. It's just when they're in their 30s when they've paid it back. Because if you look at the difference between the average mortgage and average rent, that's around $379, which is enough to cover the student loan. So we see people maybe renting before they buy houses, but then again, they made that choice to actively pursue education. I think a final point worth mentioning is that only 0.1% of bachelor's degrees and 1.1% of those who obtain associate's degrees default on their loans. The rest of the people are able to pay it out. Now, those who drop out are in a different situation. So in my opinion, from the facts I've read, I believe that it'd be better to do perhaps halt on loan payments till we perhaps get through the pandemic, and then try to find ways to restructure the system or help people complete their college education instead of dropping out so they aren't left with loans and a degree that's useless. And one final point is, if you make this blanket and you say, give everyone $50,000 off their student loans, then you're talking about everybody. If you were to limit it to a certain income level, that would be one thing. If you were to say, hey, you make less than 100,000, we'll take it off. Sure. But you're talking about people who are lawyers or people who are doctors who are making $200,000 who, yes, it's helping them, but there are people who need it more. And so you're subsidizing people who technically don't need it. And it just shouldn't happen if your goal is to help those who are at the bottom. So that's kind of my case.
So when it comes to student loan cancellation, I am not sure that a blanket just knock 50,000 or 10,000 or whatever number eventually comes up off of everybody's balance is going to be a viable intervention. I'm not sure that that's going to have the stimulus effects in the economy. I'm not sure that's going to help the number of people that we assume it's going to. And frankly, I'm not sure the political will exists at the moment. That being said, I am going to take a more middle of the road approach because I do believe that something needs to be done about the situation of student loans that we currently have in this country. And it is primarily because we have spent the past generation creating this high school to college pipeline, this idea that everybody needs to go to college. And in order to get everyone into college, we offer them tens of thousands of dollars every year in order to do that. The failure rate and the dropout rate for American colleges is astoundingly high. We have plenty of people that even if they do complete college, they're not going to find a job within their major or their field, and they're going to end up in a lower class than they would have been anyway. We don't encourage trade schools whatsoever. We do all of these things to try and force people into an educational environment that they don't necessarily need to be in. And we've been doing this for a generation now. And we have saddled a good percentage of that generation with debt that there are going to be many of them that can never pay it. And those that will be able to pay it are going to be saddled with it for years and years. And so I do believe that we do have to have a intervention of some sort. And I can't claim to be a smart enough economist to tell you exactly in what form that intervention should take. But I do believe there should be some, and there shouldn't be a feeling of austerity. But I also think that the more important problem that we ought address is the situation of higher education in general here in the United States. Because fundamentally, if every university in the country knows that each and every kid will be able to come up with $18,000 in student loans every year, they're going to make tuition, room and board, all of their expenses come out to about $19,000. And that's why you see all of the bloated administrations. That's why you see all of these colleges becoming glorified daycare centers, because they're more concerned with keeping their cash cow students on their campuses than actually being important educational institutions. So once again, we need to do something. I can't tell you exactly what that something is regarding student loans that are in existence now, but the much more pressing issue is the current situation of higher education and all of the students that are eventually going to be going through American colleges.
Okay, that's interesting. I did not expect that from John. So I have a lot to say on this. Student loans are just a plague on economic growth in America. And you can't argue the fact that money used to buy goods and services is better than money used to repay debt. The Federal Reserve says if we just bailed out all student loans for everybody over a period of time, that would basically be a stimulus of $200 to $300 every month for students. So that would automatically be more money in their pocket they could use to provide money to businesses, spend money on houses, get a child, move out of the house, things that many students delay doing because of their ridiculous student loan cost. We also need to realize that this is a problem specific to America. John mentioned, I don't know what the solution is. I mean, multiple countries have done the solution where they basically have free education. Of course, it's tax paid, but it's not costly for the individual. I mean, these countries include Sweden, Norway, Germany, Finland, France, Greece, Belgium. But apparently, the richest country in the world, we just can't seem to afford it. I don't know where the money went. Meanwhile, we spend over $600 billion in our military budget, and all we have to do is cut that by about 10 to 20%, and we could literally give paid off education for every student in America. It's not that difficult. Maybe those military bases in Africa aren't that important. I don't know. That must be a radical statement. And some replies to Matthew. I was a little bit confused by the 0.4% of economies and payments. I assume you're talking about individual payments, and that's just a number to try to convince people that's not a big problem. But as I said, student loans is $1.7 trillion. The US GDP is it's over $21 trillion, okay? But it is significant on the economic hindrance it gives to individuals. Said, not that many people default, only 0.1% of people with bachelor's degree default. It's because it's so hard to default. There's people with over $500,000 in student loans, and that's considered normal in this society. People with over $1 million in student loans that still can't declare bankruptcy or default on their payments. It's just not feasible for them because the government makes it almost impossible to do, as I stated. And that point Matthew made of, oh, we shouldn't give this to higher income people, it really doesn't matter. The people that will be helped mostly by this are middle income and the impoverished. Like, it reminds me of Pete Buttigieg when he was arguing against universal education. He's like, the millionaires shouldn't get this, even though they fund my entire campaign. They shouldn't get this at all. It's not about them. It's about just making it universal, reducing confusion. And in all honesty, if we gave it to people who are richer, its effects would be insignificant on the overall amount. So we need to realize this improves America. This improves students' livelihood. And it makes it so college isn't such a tough opportunity cost for people. Do I get crushed with crippling debt to have a small chance of a better life? Or do I take a risk and just have a high school diploma and be completely disadvantaged from everybody else with a college diploma? People should not be put in that situation.
Okay, I'd like to first of all clarify with the 0.4% versus the 8%. Okay, so we are both right. Yes, it can make up 7.5, 8% of the economy, but loan payments are 0.4% of the GDP. So you're actively making payments towards it. You're not going to pay off your student loans in 1 year, or else that'd be pretty crazy. I mean, well, it depends on the job you have, but it's a long-term thing. It's like mortgage payments. You're not going to pay off your house in 1 year. Usually it's over time you whittle away at it. And even then, mortgage payments, student loan debt is only 1/6 of that of mortgage debt. So there's bigger fish to fry in that sense. So there's other things that can go on. And the reason why your student loan debt goes through bankruptcy is because if you default on your house loan, they can take your house. If you default on your car loan, they can take your car. If you default on your education, they can't take that knowledge out of your brain. You can't reverse that. And so I guess one thing to posit is, where's the responsibility on an individual if they're pursuing something in education? Because if you're going to higher education for a job, you need to think through what you're going for, because that is an investment with your life. And even then, you don't have to rush to a 4-year university. I personally went to a community college for my first year, and I knocked out general education at a fraction of the cost of what it would cost at a state university, at one of the bigger state universities, like Purdue or Indiana University or Indiana State, like almost 1/10 of the cost of a year. Yes, it wasn't the highest quality, but it met the gen eds that I didn't need. And so saving money like that is one type of thing that you can do to kind of prevent it. Now, I agree. Yes, there may be some bloat in the system that needs to be focused on, but paying off a bunch of loans doesn't really solve that situation. Because as I said before, you still have these people who graduate that end up paying it off. It's the people who drop out. So we need to focus on those people and either get them to, as John kind of mentioned earlier, go to trade school or find some sort of other route that doesn't involve that, or maybe take a longer route so they know what they want to do and can get something under their belt, or kind of retain them within college, whatever they plan to do, because you have freedom of choice. And you mentioned, why don't we have a free education system like most of Europe? The problem with the free education system is you're going to have trade-offs. Okay, in the United States, we have almost complete freedom in what we want to do. I am a chemistry major. If I decided tomorrow I want to be a biology major, I could switch my credits, I could extend my education, but I'm going to pay for it. But God willing, I will be a biology major. That's with almost any field. If you go to developing countries, or I'm pretty sure in Europe, they may have it the same way. If you want to switch, you have to reapply for your program and you have to beat everyone else to it. Whereas most universities, you have that freedom. It's kind of like the healthcare system here. Yes, it's bloated, but you have some freedom in some respects that you wouldn't have in those countries. So I'm not saying it's the worst thing, but I'm saying there's going to be a trade-off from this. And part of, I guess, the benefit of the debt finance system we have is people take on their own risk in what they want to pursue. And so they are responsible for whether they succeed or fail within that group. And hopefully that helps to motivate. Now, I will agree that there are some things that are underpaid, perhaps like teachers, but there are also forgiveness programs for those who decide to go into those programs. So maybe a bit of restructuring, but just blanket and stating, people are in these really bad conditions and you need a college degree and they'll never be able to afford stuff, just seems kind of far-fetched. Like there's a basis where it's not as crippling as I believe you paint a picture to be.
I don't even paint it to be. Statistics tell me it is. The average student has an average amount of $33,000 in student loan debt. And you tell me that isn't crippling?
They don't pay it all off at once, though. $33,000 in debt over their lifetime. Think of how much more they'd earn by earning that degree if they chose something in a field that is worth the investment of the education.
Oh, yes, Matthew. You're saying another problem with American education is that it incentivizes people to get good paying jobs rather than the jobs they actually want to work. For example, if you're going to be a fine arts major, you're going to be in debt for the rest of your life, pretty much. You'll be very lucky if you make enough money to pay off that debt or just very budget savvy. But it incentivizes people to become bankers on Wall Street or government contractors rather than do work they're actually passionate about. And the problem is all these fields have a barrier in which a college degree is needed most of the time. You can say, yeah, you go to college, get a good paying job, and then that's the American dream. But in all honesty, many people, for example, many people in Goldman Sachs, they don't have high job satisfaction. The job satisfaction in America is pathetic. We need to rethink our goal as a country. Are we really just going to college to make a lot of money, or are we doing it to live good lives?
Well,
we're going to college in order to get good jobs. And the reason that you're able to pick your major is because hopefully you will go to a major in which you feel sort of passionate about, and then you will get a job in that particular field. I mean, realistically, passion isn't worth much when it comes to economics. And so that's why simply being passionate about something doesn't mean you're automatically going to get paid a lot of money. I mean, if I was super passionate about building snowmen out in my yard, I could do that for 1,000 years. No one's going to give me a cent for it because it doesn't add any value. It's not really worth anything. It doesn't make any new product. It doesn't make any money for any other individual. And so no one is going to pay me for that. Briefly, I want to make a couple other points. First, you mentioned that we should simply cut the military budget to pay for this. I think you severely underestimate the value of the United States' hard and soft power bought through that budget, as well as the budget is significantly higher than you actually said it was. It's about $100 billion more per year. And I also want to point out there's one more thing that I'm not sure we're all communicating. I don't think that the solution to this is some sort of system where everyone gets to go to college. Not everyone should go to college. Not everyone can get through college. And so we shouldn't have a system that incentivizes people who shouldn't go and try and get a college degree to go and try and get a college degree. That is the equivalent of wasted money. Because what are you going to do if someone spends 2 years in college and then fails out or drops out? There is nothing that's really been produced. Like it is fundamentally wasted money. And so any system that we do adopt to address either the student loan situation we have now or the situation in higher education should not be built upon the idea that every person should be able to go to college. The people that need to go to college and that can get through college should go to college.
I would like to kind of piggyback off of some points John made there. You had mentioned art school and everything. It's like, if that is your passion, you know you're going into a competitive field where you may not succeed. If you make it big and you become the next fashion designer, then yes, you become the next fashion designer. You paint art that's worth multi-million dollars. Yes, you do that, but you're going in with that risk. No one is saying you have to go to fine art school to do that. No one is saying you have to become a chemistry major. No one is saying you have to be a business major. Maybe there needs to be more focus on the high school level with guidance counselors or something like that, or, college admissions being like, is this something you seriously want to do? Because I've had relatives who've changed their minds about things and have gone into totally different fields. And some people just aren't meant for that structured setting. And it's just one of those things where you have this weird situation where, yes, you do need a further education for some jobs, but it's like, what do you see yourself doing and how do you get yourself in that field so you recognize you know what you're doing to make it worthwhile?
First, I want to touch on that military budget statement. That was for the 2019 fiscal budget year for the U.S. Now, I think it's around $700 billion, $900 billion. It's just grown, even though it has no need to. You stated something about soft power, hard power. We need to influence with diplomacy, and then we shoot them if they don't agree. The United States has a larger military than the next 10 combined, and you're saying it's still not big enough. There is not a single enemy that would dare go to war with us, nor a single enemy we need to go to war with. But yet this military budget is completely fine. Matter of fact, we should increase it. This is the ideology of many conservatives who are, just getting paid off by Boeing, as I say all the time. It's not about soft power, hard power. The United States could destroy continents with half of its military budget. We do not need the size of military budget we have. It can actually be used to improve the domestic problems of this nation. for example, college education. Now, I want to talk about this. Not everybody should go to college. This is a very similar argument. So let me just put you back. High school education is free. If it wasn't, just hypothetically, say high school education wasn't free. Conservatives and libertarians at this point would be the same people saying not everybody should go to high school. People don't need more education. I mean, it's just a ridiculous statement to me. You'd be the same people arguing that high school shouldn't be free. College is just higher education for more specialized education. There's no reason it should be different from other forms of public education because it's more specialized. That's the reason for college. It's more specialized. It should still be funded by the government because the government realizes it's a great equalizer and great for economic growth. It's like all of a sudden when you're like, oh, people should get more education and not have to risk their entire livelihood on it. And Matthew's acting like the risk is a good thing. The risk is not a good thing. A person should not have to risk delving into a field which they will base their whole life off of, because going into that field is already a risk. Why should they pay $30,000 just for the chance of a career that may not even pay off? It makes no sense, and it's just a hindrance on society, which is what we've already seen. Now, Matthew, you can say all the alternatives you wish. More counselor paying, more community college, maybe change your mind, don't go to college at all. But it doesn't solve the base problem here. The only thing that solves the base problem is the government doing what it should have done decades ago and making sure this problem doesn't fester. Because in all honesty, all the solutions you've given would not stop the problem. They would not. It doesn't matter if more people go to community college, more people decide not to go to college, the student loans would still be rising. It would be $2 trillion easily in 2022. Like none of your alternatives really solve the solution. John hasn't given a solution, just say they should do something, and I don't know what something is.
So first of all, it's already been established that only 0.1% of those who have a bachelor's degree default on it, and 1.1 with associate's degrees default on it. So we're seeing that people who do finish their college degrees are mostly paying back the money that they've borrowed. So they're being able to pay back these loans for going to school. So it's looming in a way that, yes, you have debt, but it's something you pay off over life because you decide to make the decision to do so. Now, you made an argument about high school, and you said, we just think that high school doesn't need to be free. There's a bit of a difference there. High school usually teaches you the more advanced functions that grade school doesn't really teach you and gets you of age to be able to work, because people usually when they exit high school are anywhere from 16 to 18 years old when they're legally an adult and they can make their own decisions. Now, of course, there are more advanced things you can learn, and nothing's stopping you from learning those things. Whereas there's a division between what you should learn for something that would be productive versus something you find interesting that you should learn on your own time that you don't need structure for. Okay. So for example, I'm a chemistry major. I may find I might find foreign policy real interesting, and I might want to learn about developmental economics, but that doesn't mean that I should be in a developmental economics course taking up the classroom space and the professor's time of someone who is dedicated on going into that field. That's wasting resources that doesn't need to be wasted when I can purchase a book or look on the internet and find the resources myself. Okay, so not everything has to be advanced within that. So it's like, what do you actually plan on doing? And so getting people to make a decision and narrow it down within their field would be one thing. But whenever you have people drop out or they can't find something, that is the main problem, which is why I said we need some sort of guidance. Like I said, I'm not in the field of education. I'm going to play the same card as John here. I'm not an economist. I can't tell you exactly, but if I were to look at it from my viewpoint, I would say, hey, maybe we should do something to catch them beforehand, because I kind of agree with John. Not everyone needs to go to a 4-year university. Not everybody needs that. Okay. You can become an electrician, a plumber, a carpenter. You can even have some degree of business and start your own business in that sense without going 4 years to university. And one thing I wanted to bring up is you mentioned this is the federal government's problem. The federal government needs to do things. I come from the great state of Missouri, and we have a program that's called A+. What do? If you attend you have halfway decent grades, and you tutor kids during an hour, usually during your day. They take an hour or so out of your day where you tutor kids. You usually get a free equivalent of an associate's degree at local community colleges, or some universities recognize it, and it applies to anyone across the spectrum. So you have some sort of thing you've put in, you're providing a service, and you're showing you're dedicated towards going to college, and you already have 2 years for an associate's degree essentially paid for, which can then stack to help you with your further education if you decide to pursue a bachelor's. So it's like, why can't things be done at the state level as well? We're a laboratory of states, and we can do these various things and mess around. We can experiment with things. There's various ways for this to be solved instead of let's just open it up and make education free for everyone and try to restructure the entire system as is. Now, I agree. Maybe we need to put tuition holds. Maybe there needs to be something there to stop it from inflating even more. I'd agree with you there. If you were to say, hey, maybe we stop loan payments, I'd agree with you there. But just saying, okay, let's pay off the student loans doesn't really do much either, because what happens to the people who come a year afterwards? What happens, we're all basically in our last year of college. What about you? You're in this situation. They're not going to solve it for you because they're paying the debt of the people beforehand and before. So where does this change come in? What are we actually doing instead of just printing off money essentially and saying you're paid for, you're paid for, you're paid for?
I'll let John talk just after this. I already gave the solution after that, which was universal education, mostly paid by proportional income taxes and most likely capital gains tax for the people on Wall Street, which could easily fund it. And also a cut in the military budget wouldn't hurt either. The military budget point was a point on where are American priorities. Our priorities are terrorizing countries around the world, bombing innocent civilians in the pursuit of defeating the terrorists, which will never be completely eradicated, and wasting money for the military industrial complex rather than giving money to our youngest, the people with most potential in this country, making sure they don't have to spend 20% of their income on student loan payments, and actually give them a greater chance for a better future and more income equality in America. That's what America should be fighting for, not fighting people on other continents for wars that we don't even want to get involved in. I think that point's obvious. And you said giving money to people doesn't do anything. It's literally the most thing a government could do is restructure the income to where the people who need it most get it. And it's what a universal program does. It gives a universality, so then everybody benefits. That's the point of it. That 2-year associate program teaching 1 hour, it still proves my point. It doesn't solve the problem. You still got 2 to 3 years of bachelor education you still got to get through. It doesn't solve the problem at all. All these small solutions, and you can't tell me a single state that doesn't have any student loan debt because it doesn't exist.
The point that Matthew and I's solutions are both inadequate is quite funny, because our solutions are inadequate to you because we do not have this assumption that we know exactly what needs to happen in an economy as large as ours. And so I'll admit my solution is not something I could hand the government. It's not something that I could really try and convince people on because I don't know what the right one is. I'll admit that. But I think going back to universal education, I think the assumption that universal education, everyone is going to benefit, is fundamentally flawed. Because I don't think everyone having a degree is going to somehow make it so everyone jumps up into the middle class. That's not how economics works. Like, there's a finite amount of stuff, and the stuff is going to be distributed with some people having a lot, some people having very little, and a lot of people being in the middle. I don't think that universal college is going to fundamentally restructure that. I certainly don't think that free college is going to make it so that everyone gets a high-paying job, because there's not jobs for everyone that are high-paying. So I think fundamentally, I reiterate my point that for people that currently have student loans, I think it could help the economy. I think it could help especially the middle class people who are buried under these loans to be able to put money back into the economy in a more effective way, buying houses, buying cars, taking out loans for more concrete things. And so we do need to have some sort of intervention there. And the larger point is that we need to reform the way that we give out money as a government, and whether that's through the federal government and through various state programs. I think you need some of both. We need to reform that system so that we don't keep subsidizing this trend of colleges becoming glorified daycare centers with a ton of bloated administration, so that we can have effective educational institutions without just kicking back on the government's dime, and maximize the amount of money that we as a society, as taxpayers, putting back into our education. We need to maximize our return on investment, because right now I don't see a fabulous ROI.
All right. I think that'll be it. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate John and Matthew's diverse views on this complex issue. I'm not an expert either. I'm just a poli-sci major that looks at what other countries do. And in all honesty, many of the people in Washington are not experts either on these policies. They got a law degree at Harvard, and all of a sudden they're in Washington because people elected them. I don't think many people are experts on these issues, but in all honesty, the people who others like the most are the people who have the most power. So with that, we record weekly as I snarkily get the last statement, and this will be us saying goodbye.
Ciao. See you next week.